Today I want to read from my book, Renegade Dreams. And I want to talk about the issue of gang nostalgia, but it's really an issue of generation within the gang, right? And so I'll begin. Also, please bear with me. I have a little bit of a cold, so I'm going to try to fight through it. At the West Side Juvenile Detention Center, inmates barely notice your face. It's almost like you don't have one. When you walk into a cell block at recreation time, the attention moves quickly to your shoes. They watch you walk to figure out why you came. I imagine what goes through their heads. Navy blue leather boots, at least size 12, reinforced steel toe, must be a guard. The glass door swings open again. Expensive brown wingtips, creased khakis cover the tongue. A Northwestern law student, come to talk about legal rights. Yep. Mr. Gregory wears old shoes. Still, the cheap patent leather shines. And after sitting in the waiting room for nearly an hour and a half, the squeak of his wingtips as he comes to take me back is a relief. I've been coming here for 5 years now, he says, explaining his weekly visits as a Bible study instructor. It's a shame, but you can just tell which ones have their mothers and fathers at home. Most of these kids don't. You sit around and listen to them talk. All they talk about is selling drugs and gym shoes. Though I generally don't agree with what Mr. Gregory has to say about today's young people, his comments today warrant a nod of acknowledgement. His observations are, if not quite accurate, at least astute. There is a revealing relationship between jail clothes and gym shoes, and gang renegades are at the center of it. Until recently, Mr. Gregory couldn't tell you what a gang renegade was. I know because I educated him on the topic when I heard him tossing the term around for sport. Renegades, I tell him, are young gang affiliates, typically teenagers. Seasoned members claim that they don't have the wherewithal to be in the gang. According to their leaders, renegades are the reason why the gang is not functioning as it should. But what I don't tell Mr. Gregory is this. The way that older gang members see renegades are similar to how church leaders like himself, not to mention prison guards, teachers, and even some scholars, view the urban poor more generally. Chicago's renegade problem, in other words, is a parable for how we understand the urban poor. In what follows, I want to complicate the assumptions that many have about the structure, decisions, and perspectives of renegades by examining the subjective versions of a contested and contestable gang history. Examining the gang's fraught past in a community called Eastwood will then help us understand the problems of the present. In the midst of unprecedented rates of incarceration, the anxieties that gang members harbor about the future of the organization are projected onto the youngest members and the globally circulated commodities they consume and create. For gang members currently 40 to 60 years old, the emergence of gym shoes signal an end of an era when affiliates pursued grassroots initiatives and involved themselves in local civil rights movements. Meanwhile, for the other cohort of gang members who came of age during the war on drugs, those currently 25 to 40 years old, gym shoes connote an era of rampant heroin trafficking, where battalions of gang members secured territories within a centralized leadership structure. As they remember it, this was a moment in which loyalty translated into exorbitant profits. That these two older generations hanker for a centralized gang structure where authority was more clearly ordered places an enormous burden on the youngest generational cohort, gang members currently aged 15 to 25 years old. Hence, we'll see that just like the game of shoe charades that renegades play in jail, renegades' footwear yield key insights into a person's place in the world. I should say that the renegades' gym shoes are important cultural icons in present-day Eastwood. Within the Divine Knights centralized organization, wearing the latest pair of sneakers is seen as the first status marker in the life and career of a gang member. From the time the person joins the gang, having a fashionable pair of gym shoes signals one's position as a well-established affiliate. As a young gang member, after you reach your teens or your 20s, success is measured by whether or not you can afford a nice car or maybe your own apartment. But for the teenagers they call renegades, they have yet to matriculate to that stage, so a gym shoe is the pinnacle of possession. Even though gang leaders claim that nowadays the fashion trends of young gang members are too beholden to mainstream dictates, that their style is no longer definitively the Divine Knight's own. Gym shoes are the badge of prestige that young renegades covet most. They find numerous categories and distinctions to parse between various shoes. They speculate about how exclusive a person's shoes are, whether or not they can be purchased in ubiquitous commercial outlets like Foot Locker or only in signature boutiques, or whether they are retro models from a different era. And the more colors and textures that are woven onto the canvas of one shoe, the better. To be sure, renegades in Eastwood hold similar opinions to footwear as teenagers all over the country, urban and suburban alike, gang member or not. But despite the fact that the kind of shoes renegades buy have gained a reputation in broader society through the dominance of market capitalism and the prevalence of hip-hop culture, one cannot reduce the suburban white students and the black urban gang members' predilection towards gym shoes to the same rudimentary obsession. In a community like Eastwood, where 75% of the males between the ages of 15 and 45 have a criminal record, and 57% of all men and women have been involved in the criminal justice system, the stakes are simply higher for the poor black gang member, and sneakers far more integral for these teenagers who have far fewer possessions and on a broader level, far fewer possibilities. When it comes to the Divine Knights, gym shoes signal a host of contradictions entailed in gang nostalgia, since members of the pre-renegade era can recall down to the year, sometimes even the day that they purchased the exact same pair of gym shoes they currently see young renegades wearing. That these older gang members hypocritically hassle renegades for possessing the same consumer fetishes they used to hold dear bolsters the point that at present, gym shoes have accrued an additional symbolic value. They've come to stand in for uncertainties about the future. The problem is that gym shoes, like many gang symbols, have a double quality. They represent highly charged notions of social mobility for one generation, and for another generation, simultaneously recall a notion of cohesion and nostalgia. The sentiment of nostalgia has been used to connect forms of social injury to the physical realities of the body, almost from the beginning. The term was first invented by a Swiss doctor, Johannes Ofer, in his 1688 medical dissertation. It describes, quote, a longing for a home that no longer exists or that has never existed. Among the first to become debilitated by and diagnosed with the disease were Swiss soldiers who were hired out to fight in the French Revolution. Upon returning home, these soldiers were struck with nausea, a loss of appetite, pathological changes in the lungs, brain inflammation, cardiac arrest, high fevers, and the propensity for suicide. Among nostalgia's most lingering symptoms was an ability to see ghosts. To cure this sickness, doctors prescribed anything from a trip to the Swiss Alps to having leeches implanted and then pulled from the skin to a healthy dose of opium, but nothing seemed to work. The experience of ensuing errors only confirmed the difficulty, if not the impossibility, of a cure. By the end of the 18th century, the meaning of nostalgia has shifted from a curable individual sickness to an incurable historical emotion. the burdens of nostalgia, and the weight of its historical emotion are very much still with us. Interrupting the present with incessant flashes from the past, nostalgia retroactively reformulates cause and effect. Nostalgia refigures our linear notions of history. We can't see much on nights like this, but that doesn't stop us from sitting on the stoop and watching the corner. The lights on Mr. Otis's street either don't work or are never on. In fact, they wouldn't serve any purpose at all, except that the lamp post at the street's end provides a mount for the police camera. The device rests on a white box topped with a neon blue half sphere that lights up every few seconds. Residents dismissively refer to it as the blue light. Stationed to surveil the neighborhood, the blue light fulfills another unintended purpose. In the absence of working street lights, the intermittent flash almost illuminates the entire street. It is a vague luminescence, but just enough to make out the molded wood boards of the vacant houses across the street. You can also discern the occasional trash bag blowing in the wind like urban tumbleweed. And you can also see the t-shirts, everyone in white tees. But that's about all the blue light at the end of the street allows us to see from a porch in the middle. From where we sit, you can't discern the owners of those t-shirts. Their faces aren't perceptible, not even their limbs. Just clusters of white t-shirts floating in the distance like ghosts. From Mr. Otis's perspective, a 72-year-old veteran of both Eastwood Stoops and Eastwood's oldest gang, these ghosts are a fleeting image of the good old gang, as he likes to say, as it is about to sink into oblivion. As Mr. Otis sits, his slight hunchback angles him forward. He watches the street intently as if he's being paid for the task, and in a sense he is. Central to his work as a counselor at a local violent prevention agency is to attend to the comings and goings of the street. His street credentials, however, are far more valuable than anything we can see from this stoop. Mr. Otis was one of the first members to join the Nascent Gang in the 1950s during the Second Great Migration, when African Americans moved from the South to Chicago and settled in European immigrant neighborhoods. Back then, black youths traveled in packs for camaraderie and to navigate streets full of residents who resented their presence. Since they were known to fight their white peers for access to recreational spaces, the popular image of black gangs emerged as a group of delinquents. Mr. Otis became a leader of the gang in the 1960s by the time he was 26 and has remained prominent in both the gang and the community for the next 40 years. Nowadays, Mr. Otis speaks about the gang with a mixture of fondness and disdain. The two great narratives of his life are also interwoven. See, things were different when we were on the block, Mr. Otis says. We did things for the community. We picked up trash. We even had a motto: where there is glass, there will be grass. He sings whimsically. And white folks couldn't believe it. The media, they were shocked. Channel 5 and 7 came around here and put us on the TV screen for picking up bottles. In these lively reminiscences, Mr. Otis connects the Divine Knights community service initiatives to the political struggles of the civil rights movement. When he was a youngster, Otis was part of the gang that claimed they wanted to end criminal activity. They hoped their gang could be known for activism instead. At around the same time, in the mid-1960s, a radical new thesis articulated by criminologists and the prison reform movement emerged. These researchers argued that people turned to crime because social institutions had largely failed them. Major street gangs became recipients of private grants and public funds to do community organizations, develop community social welfare programs, and enter into for-profit commercial enterprises. The Divine Knights of the 1960s opened community centers, reform schools, and a number of small businesses and management programs. Such possibilities were in full bloom when Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. relocated his family to a home near Eastwood. In June of 1966, the Divine Knights were persuaded to participate in 2 marches that Dr. King led into all-white neighborhoods during the Chicago Freedom Movement open housing campaign. Inspired by the movement's demand that the Chicago City Council increase garbage collection, street cleaning services, and building inspection services, the Divine Knights organized their own platform for political action. They scheduled a press conference with local media outlets to unveil their agenda on April 4th, 1968. King was assassinated just before the cameras arrived. Less than 24 hours later, Eastwood burst into riots. The fires and looting that followed King's murder destroyed many of the establishments along Murphy Road, Eastwood's major commercial corridor at the time. Many store owners left the neighborhood when insurance companies canceled their policies or increased their premiums, making it difficult to rebuild businesses in their previous location. This cycle of disinvestment affected all of Eastwood's retailers. By 1970, 75% of the businesses that had once buoyed the neighborhood were shuttered. There has not been a significant amount of businesses or migration into Eastwood since World War II. In the decades after the massive fires and looting, Mr. Otis and other gang elders insist that the Divine Knights lost most of their power because they could do little to stop other factions from looting. Neighborhood residents not affiliated with the gang were likewise dismayed, believing that King's murder proved that the injustices the Divine Knights alleged to be fighting were in fact intractable. From Mr. Otis's perspective, the disillusionment that accompanied King's death and the riots that followed, not to mention the other assassinations, such as that of Black Panther leader Fred Hampton, ensured a downward spiral. The stunning promise of the Civil Rights era was shattered. Its decline, as awful as its rise, was glorious. As I sit and listen to Mr. Otis, I notice how his nostalgia for a political gang is as much a yearning for the past as it is a desire for a different present. In his lamentations about the contemporary state of the gang, structural changes in the American social order are reduced to bad decision-making. Mr. Otis and gang members of his generation failed to acknowledge that the gang's latter-day embrace of the drug economy was not a simple matter of choice. The riots also marked the end of financial assistance for street organizations that wanted to curb crime through activism. The reality that the gang was, in fact, renowned for petty crime and feared for its revolutionary potential is also cleansed in the romantic histories that Mr. Otis resurrects, in which he invokes civilized marches on the same streets that are now dusky and vacant. In his telling, there is no mention that even during the civil rights heyday there were gang members who were not at all civic-minded, or that a substantial amount of gang members were still occupied with their own selfish and parochial concerns. Whether or not this glorious conception of the political gang persists, or even if it never existed in the way Mr. Otis imagined, it is deployed nevertheless. And so it is. Just like the shiny surveillance technology that transforms a person's face into a ghostly specter at night, the civil rights colored lens through which Mr. Otis views the gang helps fashion the image that haunts him. But in Eastwood, the passionate longing associated with nostalgia is not unique to politically oriented gang elders. The following generation is also beset by the following generation is beset by a devotion to the same era that Mr. Otis sees as the beginning of the end. The interview unfolds in a West Side Chicago barbershop as Red Walker, the short, stocky, tattoo-blanketed leader, reminisces about what it was like for him to grow up in the gang. He has been a member of the Divine Knights since he was 9 years old. Now as a captain of the gang set, Red feels the organization's biggest problem is a lack of leadership. He compares the gang of old to the one he now commands. This comparison begins with a rant about gang patriotism, or perhaps patriotism more broadly. Obama? Really? Red says as he watches the boy he employs to sweep up loose clouds of hair. I mean, I ain't got nothing against the brother. He's black. He's from the Chi. But I ain't gonna be walking around here with Obama shoes on like the campaign is paying me. It is fall of 2007, and Red is referring to the then potential nominee's face as it has appeared in hologram form on one of the most fashionable pair of sneakers some of the young renegades wear, Nike Air Force Ones. I don't know what Obama's gonna do if he does become president, but I know this: he can't do much, Red asserts. See, when I was his age, Red continues, again referring to the teenage boy who has just left, the gang was my nation. We were a nation of knights. I ain't wear no red, white, and blue Nikes with no politician's face on them. We kept it plain and simple. Our flag was orange and blue. Taking advantage of Red's nostalgia, I asked him about the differences between his and the latest generation of Divine Knights. Mr. Otis, that's my neighbor, I say to Red. You call these boys renegades. You say they only care about gym shoes. But he told me that you guys were the same way. He said you were good and crazy when you were younger. When he hears this comment, Red switches off his clippers. Yeah, we were crazy. But you know what the difference is? We were some close-knit crazy folk. Red puts his clippers on the countertop. We used to wear colors. Remember that? What happened to colors? Red says, questioning no one in particular. All of my clothes were orange and blue, from head to foot. We used to cock our hat to the side. What happened to that, huh? When we rocked those name brand jewels, when we had on new clothes and new shoes, it meant that we earned it. Hustling. We all look fly because we all got money. Together. We got it together. See, that's the difference, Red says. And you can tell Mr. Otis I said it. As Red reminisces about cocking his hat to the side while clad in his orange and blue uniform, the fact that he is bothered because one of his workers wears Obama Nikes demonstrates the potency of the gym shoe as a historical symbol. For Red, gym shoes conjure a time when gang leaders commanded a centralized structure in Eastwood where every person knew his place. Yet he fails to acknowledge that since his childhood, social transformations have contributed to the demise of the gang's centralized form. The present-day demise of the 1980s gang structure can only be understood in terms of the context that gave rise to it. The Divine Knights gang emerged as a full-fledged drug-dealing enterprise in the late 1970s and the 1980s, when the void left by the Italian mafia and the lack of police presence in the inner city presented an opportunity for them to mobilize around the drug trade. This was also around the same time that the national economy contracted. In a climate in which bustling factories turned into empty steel labyrinths, joblessness was tied to crime, and the specter of urban violence became a potent element in the urban imagination. As politicians spread images of inner-city danger, the specter of black crime seemed to justify the logic that longer and more severe drug penalties would curb street violence. As segments of the urban poor became increasingly visible, their very presence motivated a crackdown in urban communities, inaugurated by Ronald Reagan and continued by Presidents Bush and Clinton. A number of scholars have pointed out that during the 1980s and 1990s, it is impossible to know the extent to which crime rates had actually increased. One of the ironies of this period is that the growing politicization of crime itself contributed to higher reporting rates. In the last few decades, as government agencies have begun to take reliable records, we've now learned that violent crime has actually declined in the United States since 1993. And this downward spiral has continued into the new millennium. Still, Members of Red's generational cohort have been greatly impacted by drug legislation. From the time Red joined the gang in 1988 to the time he went to prison for a 2-year drug-related bid, the prison population in Illinois increased by 138%. That number pales in comparison to the 400% rise specific to drug offenders during that same stretch. In 1988, when Red was around the same age as the renegades he now rebukes, drug offenses made up less than 17% of all prison sentences in Illinois. In 1999, Red's final year in prison, drug offenses accounted for 40%. The next year, when Red was promoted to gang leader, 29% of all the inmates locked up in the state of Illinois hailed from his hometown of Eastwood. The 13,000 Eastwood residents Red left behind when he was released weren't all gang members. Yet the legislation passed by pointing to the drug problem had the consequence of transforming his community, Eastwood, into a prison pipeline. Hence, whether he fully acknowledges it or not, Red's nostalgia for a golden era of the gang is not exclusively about his organization or a diminished ethic of collective hustling. It is about an entire generation of adults exiled from the neighborhood through the scapegoat of gang violence. Nostalgia, that cunning historical emotion, has inverted cause and effect once again. Renegades are seen as responsible for the neighborhood's ills as opposed to their precarious subject position resulting from them. But while seasoned gang members re-articulate the past to make sense of an anxiety-filled present, renegades literally refashion the circumstances and the objects of the present to make sense of a vastly uncertain future. I considered it an ethnographic coup when I realized that 8 months into my time in Eastwood, several leaders in local schools, churches, and gang prevention agencies had become familiar with my research. Even if they didn't know the full extent of my thesis, they knew that my work involved gangs. Monique, a youth worker at Eastwood Community Church, asked me one day if I would be interested in talking to students at Brown High School for Career Day. Once I agree, she informs me that the school administration has gathered students who they have tagged as gang affiliates into one room, and that I will be in that room talking to the gang members. The morning of Career Day is crisp and blue. After a continental breakfast, I make my way up a concrete staircase to room 208, where 2 white male teachers greet me. One, Mr. Flynn, looks to be in his mid-20s. The other, Mr. Drake, is a bit older. As we enter the room, 30 unimpressed eyes turn to stare at 3 professional black men, an anthropologist, a corporate attorney, and a probation officer. After the older teacher, Mr. Drake, more or less successfully gets the attention of the class, Mr. Randall, the probation officer, begins. I work for Cook County Courts, he says. Every day I deal with kids that look like you. One boy is sitting directly in front of Mr. Randall, drawing on his desk in a loopy cursive with his pencil eraser. But as soon as his ears catch the word you, he bristles. What did you say? He responds abrasively. No, not you. I'm not talking about you specifically, Randall apologizes. I'm talking about you in the sense that they're around your age, they live in neighborhoods like this, they're black. Finding this a sufficient answer, the scribbler, whose name I later find out is Jamel, responds with a dismissive but affirmative head nod and continues his table traces. One of the things I oversee is an educational program in the Juvenile Detention Center. Oh, you mean Jumpstart, Jamel interjects almost involuntarily. Yeah, you been there? Mr. Randall says. No, Jamel mumbles, looking around nervously. But some of my friends have. Well, hopefully you won't have to go there, Mr. Randall says. But if you do, you can still get an education. Another thing I do, he continues, is monitor home incarceration. Do any of you know what that is? House arrest. Two kids chime in from opposite ends of the classroom. Yeah, that's right. And I'm going to let you in on a little secret, Mr. Randall says. He leans forward, cupping the right side of his mouth. Probation officers who monitor people on house arrest are off every other weekend and on holidays. Do what you want to do with that information. The class erupts. Students begin bouncing on the edge of their plastic seats. Oh man, so which weekend will they come? A boy asks. He has been staring out of the window until now. It don't matter, says another. If they come one weekend, you know they're off the next. That's right, Mr. Randall says. Man, what's your name? Danny, the boy replies. That's right, Danny. Just then, the younger teacher, Mr. Flint, informs the class that it would usually be the time where the students could ask questions, but we'll have to save that for later, he explains, because we're behind schedule. Right now, we'll move straight into the activity period. Now, in light of the 2008 political season, the teachers decide to hold a classroom debate. The younger teacher opens an envelope and reads a sheet of paper from it. The first debate topic is this. Jay-Z is more powerful than Barack Obama. The teenagers are initially hesitant to take sides. So the 30-something-year-old teacher, Mr. Drake, begins by arguing in favor of rapper Jay-Z. You guys know all of his songs. You know everything about him. You don't know hardly anything about Barack or what he stands for. Last night was the 19th presidential debate. Who has seen the debate so far? All of the adults raise their hands, but none of the students do. Exactly. I asked you earlier, and you guys didn't even know his wife's name. But what's Jay-Z's real name? Sean Carter, the kids say in unison. And who's his wife? Beyonce, they say in rhythm. See what I mean? Mr. Drake says, smiling. But I think Barack is more powerful, Danny says, interrupting his teacher's happy experiment. Because he's trying to be president. Jay-Z's just trying to be rich. And plus, Barack, he got plans and stuff for how to improve our lives. He tells us about change, how to change the world, you know. All Jay-Z tells us about is how to hustle, how to sell drugs, how to live in the hood, which we already know, he says, gesturing towards the window, which overlooks one of Chicago's poorest areas. But Jay-Z got clothing lines, Jamel intervenes. He got a record label. He produces movies. He got a restaurant. He got his own shoes. In making his case, he gestures towards another student's feet, which are adorned with pearl white S. Dot Carter's, Jay-Z's signature shoe. People in the hood, we want that. We want to dress like Jay-Z, eat what he eats, be on his label. But Jay-Z is a rapper, Danny roars. A rapper can never be as powerful as the president. The president can raise taxes, lower taxes. A president can send us to war, make us go to the draft. Danny says, gaining steam. A president can send Jay-Z to war if he wants to. If we get evicted, what's Jay-Z gonna do? When you living in your car that don't have no gas and can't even work? How you gonna turn on the radio then? What then, huh? The room goes silent. Danny for president, Mr. Randall yells out. After a few more activities, complete with a school assembly and a keynote speech by a local city councilman, Monique and I leave Brown High School through the parking lot. One student looking out of the window from the school's top floor yells, "Goodbye, have a nice day." He's speaking in the nasal voice that black comedians use in exaggerated imitations of white people. Another student, now switching to his actual voice, howls, "Now get in your car and drive home. And don't come back," another one says. "Hey man, hey, is that your girl?" He continues to heckle while we walk, stoic and unconvincingly deaf. You hear me talking to you, man. Why don't you get the fuck out of here? Bye now, another one says, returning to his uptight white person's voice. As we left Brown High School just a few minutes earlier, I had felt the small blossom of nostalgia. I remembered why I had been drawn to education as a teenager, the times when unexpected lessons from strangers became more fulfilling than what I was actually learning in the history books. This created in me a sense that I could amend what I was being taught with a more experiential understanding of how the world worked. Although most of the time it seemed that the kids were barely listening to me throughout the day, I had felt a palpable sense of accomplishment. The window hecklers, however, quickly deflate my pride. And yet I am more surprised by the hecklers' resentment than I should have been. These students, flagged as gang members, are encouraged to discern exactly what is possible by referencing disparate archetypes of power. On this day embodied by a successful rapper and a potential presidential nominee. Although most people hope that Barack Obama will serve as an icon for boundless possibilities, professional, personal, and social alike, gang affiliates like Jamel fit him in the narrow frame reserved for successful athletes and rappers who just want to be famous. Other people like Danny achieve the conception that the administration hopes for. Still, professional blacks, entertainers, and politicians nevertheless represent a paradoxical existence for Eastwood youth, seemingly familiar in skin color, yet fundamentally unrecognizable in future prospects. The students who taunt us articulate a struggle against a middle-class morality that conceives of career day as a feasible response to escalating school dropout rates and permanent unemployment. Their taunts respond to the event by making respectable adults feel uneasy about swooping into the school for the day, telling them how to conceive of the future only to abscond after a few hours. There is little doubt that part of the influence that a gang leader has over a young renegade is that his commitment extends beyond a single day. A gang leader's aims are no doubt self-serving, yet he and other leaders in Eastwood were a far more constant presence in the daily lives of teenagers than successful professional blacks. Still, both gang leaders and career day speakers face resentment when trying to socialize young urban residents. Our window hecklers offer one kind of resentment, a scornful disdain for our fly-by-night charity work. But within the gang, a second kind of resentment surfaces, and it is symbolized through and by refashioning gym shoes. This is how young renegades establish their own brand of belonging during moments of political and economic transition, moments that prove to be confining. When I told Danny a few weeks later that I wanted to interview him for my research project, I never dreamed that the majority of our conversations would take place in the West Side Juvenile Detention Center. I've been waiting here for an hour, largely unnoticed. As I scan the room, my eyes meet a guard's, and he views me suspiciously. His glare is ironic, standing in striking contrast to the diverted eyes of the inmates who never noticed your face in the Juvenile Detention Center. Upon entering the facility, everyone is issued the same uniform, dark gray khakis, a green t-shirt, and in winter, a green sweatshirt as well. The clothes come in different sizes, but each garment fixes a person's status as inmate. As the confines of plexiglass encasements become home, these teenagers have only to look around to be reminded that they are incarcerated. That is, unless they look down. When teenagers are arrested and sent to the detention center, they are stripped of everything except for the shoes they are wearing when they arrive. Because the county can't afford to equip each new arrival with new shoes, inmates keep the ones they were wearing when they were arrested until their trial date, when they are either transferred to a prison or released. As a result, icebreaker conversations center on what kind of shoes you wear in your neighborhood, the number of pairs you have at home, and the type of shoes you plan to buy when you get out. By now, I am aware of the characteristics of shoe talk in the juvenile detention center and beyond. So when I spark a conversation with Danny during his visitation period, I begin by mentioning the brand of footwear he's currently wearing. At least you came in here with some new Timbs. They gotta be giving you some respect, right? Could have been worse, he says playfully. My friend Scooter got arrested in flip-flops. So how you doing, I ask. Not so good. Not good at all. My lawyer says they're trying to move my charges up to attempted murder, Danny replies. I pause for a moment to receive the blow. I don't know what to say since the case against Danny seems so devastating. The circumstances of his arrest are as follows. One day, Danny was walking his girlfriend Tasha home while holding his gang leader Chemo's gun. Leaders like Chemo often roam without drugs and guns because the police know them and subject them to random searches. Plus, if a minor like Danny is caught with contraband, he will receive less time. As Danny walked, he noticed that a squad car was tailing him, so he asked that his girlfriend Tasha pretend to drop her cell phone to see if the gun was visible from behind. She agreed and confirmed that the handle was protruding from the small of his back. Danny kept walking, hoping the cops would fail to notice and drive away. But when the couple stopped at Tasha's doorstep, he realized that the officers were quickly approaching. He took off running. Danny rounded a corner and threw Chemo's gun over a fence. The gun, which had a broken safety, discharged as it hit the ground. It is this event that threatens to ratchet up his charges from gun possession to attempted murder. The prosecution claims that Danny was shooting at the police. Ironically enough, the sound of the gun blast made Danny think the police were shooting at him, so he kicked it into high gear and escaped through an alleyway. He retreated to his older brother's apartment. The next day, Danny got word that Chemo was looking for him. He and other leaders wanted to meet. During the conference, Chemo explained that the incident the day before had already brought unwanted attention to his drug operation and that as a result, the rival gang was profiting and he was losing money. He told Danny that he must face sanctions. The burly Chemo landed a swift hook to the right side of Danny's face. Then, pleased with his extra size of brawn, Chemo looked towards his team and began to snicker. With Chemo's back turned, Danny grabbed a pipe and told his fellow gang members to stand down. He walked backwards until he reached the shelf and exchanged the pipe for another one of Chemo's guns and pointed it at the owner. You run now and it'll be 10 times worse when we catch you, Chemo ranted. But Danny didn't listen. He backpedaled through the garage and he reached the street and running feverishly as he had the day before. Only this time he dashed to his best friend's cook's house. His confidant explained that the police had been at Danny's home and his school with a warrant. He advised Danny to turn himself in. With the police and the gang after him, Danny took his best friend's advice, but with a caveat. Before hitching a ride to jail, the young renegade borrowed Cook's brand new boots. He knew what to expect inside the detention center. My conversations with Danny at the detention center exemplify the social constraints under which young gang members struggle in the contemporary moment. In this context, gym shoes symbolize the renegade's precarious balancing act. On the one hand, gang members are viewed as disloyal to the gang. But on the other hand, it is not as if this dissonance improves their life conditions or permits them to reach a middle-class standing. Instead, renegades are stuck, running from law enforcement to their gang leader's garage, only to flee back into the police custody and return to the juvenile detention center, where mass incarceration lends a more pointed meaning to the mass production of their footwear. We've learned that it's easy to criticize young gang members. We've learned that it's easy to criticize young gang members in their obsession with shoes. The experts who circulate in Eastwood all seek to understand how these kids can spend so much time literally staring at their feet. The comparisons abound. When I was your age, many scholars and guards and preachers no doubt think, I picked up trash and marched in picket lines. These kids, by contrast, seem utterly confounding, self-obsessed, and directionless to boot. Their bearing, tough yet lackadaisical, suggests that their current decisions to sell drugs is a matter of personal choice alone. Indeed, they seem willfully ignorant to the larger social forces that have led them to hustle on the corner or into the juvenile detention center, as if their gang's shift to increasingly diffuse factions is not linked to an era of mass incarceration. And yet, as I overcome my desire to shake these teenagers into reality, I see that Red Walker and Mr. Otis have the same blind spots. The history of the gang that these long-standing members acknowledge also erases key social and historical processes that have transformed the ways that traditional membership is conceived and experienced. When the gang is perceived as being less political and less profitable than it once was, the focus of attention, and especially the blame, falls onto the attitudes, the orientations, and the behaviors of those who are not yet locked up for long periods of time. Often the youngest members, who older members view as key to the gang's future. This is how gang leaders and jail guards, Bible studies instructors, and well-meaning professors alike fail to understand the young urban poor. We don't deem their jailhouse conversations as worthy of reflection. We don't see these conversations as ripe with nostalgia and historical consciousness. We don't see how they speak to the anxieties of living in a society that contains no feasible fulfillment for your hopes and desires. But at the Westside Juvenile Detention Center, I hear these kind of conversations on a daily basis as young renegades fashion their future out of what little material they have left. Them Air Force Ones, Scooter says as I'm about to leave for the day. He's inspecting my black Nikes, scrutinizing the green and yellow highlights. I hesitate because I know the make but not the model of my shoes. I would check the tongue, but I don't want to seem insecure. Nah, man. Those some dunks, Danny says, saving me. Everybody on my block rocks them. Those are cool, he says, eyes still glued to my feet. But as soon as I get out, I'ma cop them new Jordans. Scooter smiles and nods. Yeah, me too. Thank you.